All right. We are going to be in Exodus 26 today. For all those of you who thought we were still in Exodus 25. Oh, there it is. Okay. Exodus 26. Now, I've got something up here for us to look at, and if you're watching, we'll show you that in a little bit. But I'm going to get into this. What I want to do, it's a fairly long chapter. I want to read the whole chapter, get that out of the way, and then we can go back and talk about it. So let's just go ahead and read Exodus 26, and then we will move forward. Oh, yeah, we got to do the thing. The thing. Hang on here. I'll get us logged in. Hopefully. All righty. Here you go. Okay, Exodus 26. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine woven linen and blue, purple, and scarlet thread with artistic designs of cherubim you shall weave them. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits. Excuse me. And the width of each curtain 4 cubits. And every one of the curtains shall have the same measurements. 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. And you shall make the loops of blue yarn on the edge of the curtain and on the selvage of one set. And likewise you shall do on the outer edge of the other curtain of the second set. 50 loops you shall make in the one curtain, and 50 loops you shall make on the edge of the curtain that is on the end of the second set, that the loops may be clasped to one another. And you shall make 50 clasps of gold, and couple the curtains together with the clasps, so that it may be one tabernacle. You shall also make curtains of goat's hair to be a tent over the tabernacle. You shall make 11 curtains. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the width of each curtain 4 cubits. Excuse me. Any of you sew? 30 cubits. Roughly 45 feet. Curtains. 45 feet long. So the length of a curtain shall be 30 cubits, is 45, and the width is 4 cubits, which would be 6 feet. So 6 feet by 45 feet. Imagine. Of goat's hair curtains. No, they're all different. That's what I'm saying. Everything we're reading is different. That's the one set. Super heavy. They're made of this incredibly heavy goat's hair. So it's like you're using a skin of an animal to make these curtains, these particular curtains. Oh yeah, and it's all hand done. There is no like sewing machines. There's none of that kind of stuff. It's all hand done, right? So this is a big deal. I just want you to kind of, as we're reading this, I want you to get this mental picture going of the enormity and magnitude. Yeah, I'll come back to them and show them to you guys. That's why I'm kind of reading through them. I may stop here in a minute just to jump into it because it's hard for me not to want to get into it. And the 11 curtains shall be of the same measurement. Verse 9. And you shall couple 5 curtains by themselves and 6 curtains by themselves, and you shall double over the 6th curtain at the forefront of the tent. And you shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of one of the curtain on the second set. And you shall make 50 bronze clasps, put the clasps into the loops, and couple the tent together, that it may be one. Notice on the layer on the outside of the inner curtain that's going to be covering, the clasps are not gold, they're bronze. Okay? Bronze is a much sturdier metal than gold. Okay? Where'd I stop? 12. The remnant that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle, and a cubit on one side and a cubit on the other side. So it's going to hang down on each side about 1 cubit, which is about 18 inches or so. Okay? Over the sides of the tabernacle and on the side that is on the side to cover it. Okay. Verse 14. You shall also make a covering of ram skins dyed red for the tent, of a covering hang on, I just skipped a word. You shall also make a covering of ram skins dyed red for the tent, and a covering of badger skins above that. So 2 more layers, ram skins and badger skins, 4 layers total. And for the tabernacle, you shall make the boards of acacia wood standing upright. Now remember, the acacia wood is the same as the shittim wood in the King James Version, okay? Very expensive, very sturdy, very rare also. Very difficult to come by, okay? So something of high value, high price, and yet very human in its design, right? Natural. Once again, the humanity of Christ represented in all aspects of, now we're talking about doing what? Supporting the tabernacle. Okay, supporting the covering of the tabernacle. So at the very core of supporting everything, even a mobile building, the support is still the embodiment of Christ. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I told you we're going to read the whole thing, and I can't contain myself. 16. 10 cubits shall be the length of a board. 10 cubits the length of a board, about 15 feet, okay? And a cubit and a half shall be the width of each board. So these are 15 feet, but a cubit and a half is about 27 inches. So it's over 2 feet. These are some big boards, okay? These are some big, they're not just boards, they're pillars. They're huge, okay? 17. 2 tenons shall be in each board for binding one to another. Thus you shall make for all the boards of the tabernacle. Roger, you have the Amplified Version in verse number 17 where it says 2 tenons. Doesn't that say dovetails in the Amplified Version instead of tenons? Dovetails. Okay, so in the Amplified Version it says dovetails, which is an interlocking system. But I'm going to come back to that. So note verse 17, because we're going to talk about that a little bit at length here in a few minutes. And you shall make the boards for the tabernacle, 20 boards for the south side. You shall make 40 sockets of silver under the 20 boards, 2 sockets under each of the boards for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, there shall be 20 boards, and there 40 sockets of silver, 2 sockets under each of the boards. For the far side of the tabernacle westward, you shall make 6 boards, and you shall also make 2 boards for the 2 back corners of the tabernacle. They shall be coupled together at the bottom, and they shall be coupled together at the top by 1 ring. Thus it shall be for both of them. They shall be for the 2 corners. Excuse me. So there shall be 8 boards with their sockets of silver, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under each of the boards. And you shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the boards on the one side of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the boards on the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the boards of the side of the tabernacle for the far side westward. Okay, now, Old English is really hard to understand because they don't just say make 5 boards for each side. This is the way we would say it today, right? So when you're saying this, it keeps putting it on, but just keep in mind how you're reading, okay? All right, 28. The middle bar shall pass through the midst of the boards from end to end. You shall overlay the boards with gold, make their rings of gold as holders for the bars, and overlay the bars with gold. And remember, once again, this whole support system is made of wood overlaid with gold. What's the foundation of the Ark of the Covenant? Wood overlaid with gold. The embodiment of Christ as the foundation, the support, the structure, the building. Okay? I cannot emphasize this enough. He is the foundation. Remember the construction of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark itself, or the holding place, is made of the acacia or the shittim wood overlaid with gold. But the mercy seat is one solid piece of pure gold. Okay? Because that signifies what? Go deeper. It signifies God the Father, who has never been in human form. We're in his likeness, but he's never been in human form. God is what? Spirit. The Father is spirit, but the Son became flesh and dwelt among us. Okay? So now the Son is both flesh and spirit in combination, fully God, yet fully man. So the fully God-man Son of God is the representation of the entire support system for all belief, for all worship, for all things. It's very important to see this throughout every bit of the worship of the tabernacle. And remember, as we're establishing this, God is establishing worship. He's establishing everything right now. Everything you and I take for granted and we just do because we showed up at church and somebody told us to do it is all being established right now. This is all the foundational elements. And in every piece, every part, every instruction for manufacturing it, he is there. And he is the cornerstone of the building. Yes?
And he is the builder and the creator of the church. And it's interesting that he uses human beings to build the church. And it is overlaid in pure gold of we are encased in him as being the head. And the Shekinah is the mercy seat that overshadows the church.
Right. It's pointed out that the church today is made up of humans, but those humans are overlaid with the gold or the Spirit of God, and then his glory, which is the pureness or the Shekinah glory of God, falls down and dwells there just as he did in the tabernacle. So all of this is not, I just had this conversation with someone, there is no separation, division, or derivation between old and new covenant. There is a continuity that runs from old to new covenant that is a plan laid out and a plan fulfilled. Okay? That is exactly what Christ did. He took the plan that he laid out, by the way, in the beginning, and then fulfilled it as he said he would. Okay? So just don't lose sight of that as we're reading about this building. This building is the epitome of symbolism. Okay? It is just the epitome of symbolism. As will be Solomon's temple when it is finally built. Okay? It will just be a continuation of this in a permanent building as opposed to a mobile house of worship. All right, where do we stop? Somebody said 28, somebody said 30. I think it was 30 because we got down a little further. And you shall raise up the tabernacle according to its pattern which you were shown on the mountain. Moses has already seen this on the mountain with God. God gave him deep revelation of many things, and not just the 613 laws that he wrote down. God has given him incredible insight as to what is coming. So God says, you're going to build this according to the pattern which I showed you. You shall make a veil of woven blue, purple, and scarlet thread and fine woven linen. No lemons, just linen. It shall be woven with an artistic design of cherubim. You shall hang it upon the 4 pillars of acacia wood overlaid with gold. Their hooks shall be gold upon 4 sockets of silver. And you shall hang the veil from the clasps. Then you shall bring the ark of the testimony in there behind the veil. The veil shall be a divider for you between the holy place and the most holy. You shall put the mercy seat upon the ark of the testimony in the most holy. You shall set the table outside the veil, and the lampstand across from the table, and on the side of the tabernacle toward the south. And you shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the door of the tabernacle, woven of blue, purple, and scarlet thread and fine woven linen, made by a weaver. Verse 37, and you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be gold, and you shall cast 5 sockets of bronze for them. Now, keep in mind, we have been talking about all of this. Don't think that I don't know that there's supposed to be an altar of incense inside of the holy place as well. God just hasn't talked about that yet, okay? We'll get there. All right, so I want to go backwards a little bit, and I'm going to read, we'll kind of go back into this. One of the things that I want us to really clearly see here is in this whole process of design, how God is raising up this building. So we're talking about the 4 layers that are on top here. You see the one here, the blue, the goat skins, the ram skins, and badger skins, all of this stuff that's going over the top of this. So we have all 4 of these layers that are going to happen here. And then you see all of these pillars and the sockets with the posts that go through the sockets and all that stuff. It's probably a little blurry to some of you. You can look at this later if you want to. And then you see the big veil that's between the holy place and the most holy, or the Holy of Holies, behind the veil there. Ark of the Covenant, candlestick holder, the table of showbread, and then we haven't gotten to the altar of incense yet, okay? So this is the design that runs here through this. You see out in front there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pillars in front. You have the 20 pillars going down each side. You have the 6 pillars going across the back side, and the 4 pillars that will be here in the middle inside to hang the veil that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies. Okay? Everybody kind of got that? Makes sense? All right. So I just want to give you a little bit of a visual. And, of course, this is the screen in the front that he makes, a beautiful screen to cover that. So the Lord gave Moses the instruction for the building of the tabernacle, and it was to be made from 10 curtains decorated with blue, purple, and scarlet thread and embroidered with cherubim. These curtains would each be about 42 feet long and 6 feet wide. 2 sets of 5 curtains were joined together to make 2 long curtains. The ends of each of these 2 curtains were to have loops and golden clasps so they could be fastened together, and the tabernacle would appear to be made of one continuous fabric. Mr. Guzik makes this particular observation. The plans for the tabernacle were revealed to Moses from inside out. Okay? Starting with the interior furniture and then working his way out. We approach the sanctuary from the outside in, but God builds the sanctuary from the inside out. He works on his people according to the same pattern. Keep that in mind. The tabernacles that God has always designed have always been designed from the inside out. God's not concerned about your outside in. He's concerned about your inside out. Too many people look at the outside and pay attention, right? But we got to look at it the other way. The designs on this covering were... What's that? As it is in heaven. That's right. The designs on this covering were visible only from the inside of the tabernacle. Therefore, on the inside of the tabernacle, one would see cherubim all around as one would see heaven. All right, so now make the picture. I forgot to reset my screen turn off on this thing. I'm sorry. So make the picture now. If you're inside of the tabernacle, looking up, you're looking at this beautifully woven fabric that is pictures of cherubim and this deep blue and scarlet colors and all of this that is royalty and all these things, but it's like you're looking at this heavenly scene above your head. It's incredible, right? It's this incredible view that you're just in the presence of God in heaven by being inside the tabernacle. So every time those particular priests who were privileged to be the priests, to get to go in and administer the rites inside of the tabernacle itself, it's like walking into heaven. Everything is gold and shimmering and beautiful, and then it's all this heavenly adornment inside, right? So it's this beautiful thing that God designed to be a symbol of coming into the presence of God. The literal presence of God. It wasn't good enough that the Shekinah of glory of God was just shining all around in the Holy of Holies, right? That it was emanating up from outside the tabernacle. But when you walked into the tabernacle, it was literally the presence of God. It was like being in heaven. This beautiful, shimmering, heavenly place, which is what God designs our worship to be. When we come into worship before God, it's supposed to draw us into the presence of God. That's what we're supposed to be in, right? I love one of the joys of getting to be up front is I get to watch a lot of people when they worship. You know, some people I don't like watching when they worship because they're stumps, and they just you could tell their facial expression just. Is it lunchtime yet? You know, that it just makes you feel like that's what they're saying. You know, you just feel like it. And there's other people who don't really move much, but you can tell by the facial expressions that they have how much they're enjoying this and how it's getting them, the tears in their eyes, all the stuff. And there's some people who can't stand still, you know, when they're worshiping. They just got to keep moving around. It hits them, and they just don't want to stand still. And they got to do, whether it's clapping or it's raising your hands or it's maybe even moving around and walking around or whatever. It hits you, and you got to do something. So everybody does this differently. One of the things I played the drums last night, so I got a little more face time because I don't have to be paying as much attention to what I'm doing between sitting on a piano and playing the piano is much more difficult for me than playing the drums. So you're sitting there on the piano and having to pay attention to all those chords and all that stuff, and I don't get to watch as much, right? Because I'm more focused on what I'm doing. Playing the drums is just a rhythmic thing for me, so I'm getting to look around a lot. And so last night I'm just looking, and it was a smaller, it's a Wednesday night crowd, so it's not as big as a Sunday crowd, but still getting to watch the people worship, getting to watch the looks on their faces, getting to see them getting involved in certain lines of certain songs when it hits home with somebody. There's just sometimes you can see it, right? When we were singing The Blood last night, I could see a couple of people's faces. There was a couple lines that just produces this immediate emotional response. And it's so cool to watch that. And to be part of that. And I was telling one of the girls last night how much I appreciated seeing her sing those songs, how much it meant to me to see her face when she was doing that, because it just ministers to my heart. It touches me, you know. So being in this presence of God and being able to see this and experience this and have that being part of that worship that was their lives when they walked into that tabernacle. What an emotional moment. Can you imagine just walking in? Not only that you're in the presence of God, I mean, they were literally in the presence of God, but to see this beauty that comes with the presence of God. And that's what our worship is supposed to do. The honesty of our worship, the openness of our worship, to break our spirits before God and cause us to come in and see Him in a heavenly place and Him to visit with us. Okay, so I just want to point that out. To me, that's just, I mean, we're talking about the design here, and I'm going to get back into the details, but all that to me is just, it's fluff. It's Adam and Eve having belly button stuff to me. I'm not one of those guys that, I have to read it, I have to study it, because they won't give me those pieces of paper on my wall if I don't know some of it. But I just really don't care that much. I care less if there were 75 curtains or there were 3, right? Or there were 4 like there really are, covering it. I care about walking in and looking and being in the presence of God and analyzing all that stuff. I care about something else I'm going to talk to you about in a minute about it as well. So they were to make 11 curtains out of goat hair with cloth measuring 45 feet long by 6 feet wide. Goat hair curtains, 45 by 6. Can you imagine the weight of just one of those things? Just rolling that thing up and trying to carry it around. I mean, yeah. Oh, it's just an enormous rug, though. I mean, I've been a flooring contractor for a long time, and rolls of carpet can be extremely heavy. Extremely heavy, right? So I can only imagine this. 5 curtains were to be joined together into one. So they took these 5 curtains, and when they were putting it together, they would join them together as one huge one. by these clasps and stuff that they were making out of gold to put them together. These curtains would also have loops and golden clasps so that they would be joined together as one continuous piece. The tent covering would extend 3 feet longer than the first fabric covering in the front and back of the tabernacle and 18 inches longer on the sides. Finally, these fabric coverings would be protected by a leather overlay. Therefore, the fine linen layer, the heavenly set of coverings on the inside, was completely obscured and overlapped by the dark covering of goat's hair on the outside. It was not open to observation, even in part, from the outside. Heaven remained hidden to all except those who entered in through the door of the tabernacle. The outer covering of badger skins, or perhaps porpoise or sea cow skins, the different translations bring it out as, was a durable, water-resistant outer layer that protected it. It wasn't particularly beautiful to look at, but it was extremely practical and comfortable. It protected from the weather and the elements. It also insulated and protected from the intense heat of the desert, right? You got to remember where they're at. It's intense heat. So it protected from the heat, it protected from the elements, it protected from the weather. It wasn't all that good to look at from the outside, though. Right? I mean, if you take a look at the outside covering here, just in this little picture depiction of it, you'll see that it's just this brown kind of not really attractive thing that we see on the outside if it ever comes back up. There it is. Okay. So it's just dull and brown on the outside. It's not really anything fancy to look at. By the way, it also covers up all the gold. So it covers up the beautiful curtains and tent that's made on the inside that everybody gets to look up and see this gorgeous, beautiful scenery, and yet from the outside it just looks dull and drab and boring. And I don't really have to point out the symbolism there. Obviously, there's a lot of times that people have told me about living the Christian life and it's just dull and it's boring and it's this and that, all that stuff. But let me tell you something. When you really have the tabernacle of worship on the inside, it's anything but. It's a complete thing of beauty. It's a complete thing of glory, of wonderment, of awe. Even though people can't see it from the outside doesn't really matter. It's what's going on the inside is all that matters. It's all that matters. Now, what goes on the inside should radiate to the outside. Okay? Now, how does that play into this with what I'm talking about? It plays into this because in the Holy of Holies, where that mercy seat sat, that's where the Shekinah, the glory of God, settled and could be seen not just outside the tabernacle, but for miles and miles and miles around, and struck fear into the enemies of Israel. So if you get it alive within you, it'll show outside. You may look dull and drab and plain, but when the glory of God starts to come out, it'll strike fear in the heart of your enemy, Satan, and it'll cause others to come in and awe and wonder and say, wow, I'd sure like to go in there and see what that is. Okay? The frame of the tabernacle was to consist of 20 framed sections to support the south side of the tabernacle, 20 to support the north side of the tabernacle, each 15 feet high and 27 inches wide, made of gold overlaid acacia wood, and with 2 pegs under each frame. 80 silver bases, 40 for the south and 40 for the north, were to be made, 2 per wooden frame, with the pegs of each frame fit securely into it. 6 more wooden frames were to be made to support the rear of the tabernacle on the west side. Then an additional 2 wooden frames, 1 for each rear corner. These rear frames would be set on or in 16 silver bases. Apparently, each of these bases stood beneath the junction where the frames met. The right peg of one frame and the left peg of the next frame went into one base. Each board or frame rested on 2 sockets of silver, each socket made with 1 talent of silver. Therefore, each board rested on a base of 264 pounds. This thing was this, It was about 45 feet long and 15 feet wide total, right? Okay, this is about the size of the tabernacle. So it wasn't a huge building, but that's still pretty good size. It's longer than this building, not quite as wide as this building. Okay? Or pretty close. It's pretty close. But it would be a little bit longer than this. So it's pretty close. And it was this enormity. Every one of these things had a 264-pound base to these supports that would hold these posts. And we read a word earlier, and I want to go back to this in verse 17. It said, 2 tenons shall be in each board for binding one to another. Thus you shall make for all of the boards of the tabernacle. Now that word tenons, and in the Amplified Version it says dovetail. If you know anything about construction, when you dovetail, it allows you to make a joint to bring wood together, okay, or anything together, right, and lock them in together. Well, let me tell you something about the Hebrew word that is used right there. That Hebrew word is yaud, Y-A-D, okay, yaud. That Hebrew word is used, I think, somewhere around 1,600, 1,700 times in the Old Testament. But about 1,560-ish times, I'm a little off on those numbers, but it's really close, it's used for the word hand. The word hand. So, let me give you the analogy of how the construction of the tabernacle is put together. Okay? The construction of the tabernacle is put together this way. We got all this beauty. We've got all these things around, but there still needs to be these enormous bases that are put in place to interlock into the posts to hold them, so that in the extreme weather and winds and things that happen in the deserts of the northern Egypt into Jordan and into southern Israel areas, all of that stuff, all of that whole terrain gets incredible windstorms and sandstorms, and it's just a very, very ominous place when it comes into especially summertime and such. So at the base of all of these posts, at the foundation of everything, was the Yahweh. It was the hand of God to support all things. It was symbolic of God's hand interlocking with whatever is put in it, okay? Whatever in your life is put in God's hand, it will become that tenon or that dovetail or that hand of God that will interlock with it and hold it and be the foundation that no amount of weathering can move. There's never an instance or an incident recorded in history or the Word of God where there was a storm that was strong enough to cause damage to the tabernacle of God in the wilderness. And they had plenty. They had 40 years of weather. 40 years of sandstorms, rainstorms, flooding, whatever. You know, deserts tend to have flash floods all the time. All of that stuff would come and it would go, and it would come and it would go, and that portable, mobile building withstood the test. Why? Because the silver was heavy enough? No. Because the curtains were heavy enough? No. Because of the way it was supported, it was dovetailed, or it was in the hand of God. That's where we live. That's where our tabernacles will find their support. The only place it will ever find the support is in the hand of God. He said, I will lift you up by the right hand of my power. I will place you in my hand. I will carve out a place in my hand for you. I will dovetail you in and interlock with you, and I'll put you here that no man, neither height nor depth nor principality nor things present or things to come, right, so on and so forth, can remove you from my love, and I will inscribe your name on my hand. I will inscribe my name on your heart, and you cannot be separated. All of that started here. All of it starts there. Why? Because every bit of what's gone on in history from eternity past to right now has all been symbolic of the plan of God to take us and all of these foundational elements that he put in this building here so that we could see his glory at all times from every angle and every direction if we would do what? If we would stay in the tabernacle. Stay in his presence. Stop walking away. Go where the foundation is sure. Stop going to all of the things that man has for us and stay where God wants to secure us for an eternity. So this particular format that God lays out is not just for us to have an idea that it's a pretty cool looking place. It is absolutely for us to see the hand of God and the support of God and the power of God in all things, and to be able to know we can dwell in the glory of God because we'll be supported by him. Right? From soup to nuts, it's always been him and his hand. But did you have a question?
Did they put the tabernacle up almost every time they stopped, or did they?
Every time that they moved, they would reset the tabernacle. When God moved them to a new place, they would reset the tabernacle. Quite often, yeah. Quite often, and quite a job. It was an absolute chore. You can see by the weight and the enormity of these things, these 15-foot high, 27-inch wide, thick posts of acacia wood. And acacia wood's very dense, very heavy, okay? Number one. And then it's overlaid with gold, which is one of the heaviest metals that we have. You know, gold bars, you get a little gold bar, it's extremely heavy. So it's overlaid with gold. You got super heavy wood, super big size, and it was overlaid. And it had to be carried by priests. On their shoulders. You could not just put this stuff someplace. You couldn't go pack mule it. Because if animals were going to touch these things, they would become unclean. They had to, when these things were made, they would have to be sanctified, purified, cleansed. And then they could not touch anything unclean. They had to be protected properly, carried properly, and dealt with the way God wanted them dealt with at all times. There was no exception to the rule. If something was made unclean, it was destroyed and rebuilt. Oh yeah, it was torn down piece by piece. The Levites, every one of them had jobs. They had people who were designated to that, teams of the priests that were designated to specific issues, specific things, and each one of them had to take care of their thing. No other way, and nobody else could touch it. You couldn't say, hey, Reuben, come help me. Meaning the tribe of the Reuben, right? Couldn't do that. It had to be those men from those tribes, from the tribe of Levi, and from those particular jobs. That's what God has done. God has designated and ordained us to be his priests. We all have jobs. Some guy had to carry around sockets. Doesn't seem like a very important job, does it? But without those little clasps and those sockets, the whole building falls apart. The first big windstorm that comes along, if you don't clasp all of those drapes that are being made, all those huge curtains that are being made, they're all going to blow right off the top. These guys are out here, and there's pegs and lines that will come off for securing it that they talk about later. When those things, if they're not there, then that top layer is just loose and blows off. The covering of those badger skins, the badger skins. The badger skins on the outside. I keep wanting to think sea cows because there's so many different terminologies for what they call these things that they use for the outside. But that outside layer was the protection, right? The covering and protection. But if that's not there, if it's not held down, it would just blow away. every detail had to be dealt with at every moment. And you say, well, that's too much. No, it's not too much. It's a privilege. There's not one of these people who ever felt that this was a chore, and if they did, they were removed. This was a privilege to get to be part of the house of God. You had honor in being part of the house. They were highly revered by the household of Israel to have these jobs. And yet today, we get jobs in the church, and if we don't have the upfront job, then we think that we don't have honor and respect. Somebody had to clean every one of those utensils that were there. A guy had a job of cleaning that table of showbread and making sure it was ready and consecrated for God. A guy had a job of cleaning the plates, right? A guy had a job of cleaning the brass clasps and rings. A guy had a job of cleaning the gold and the silver, and everybody had their jobs. All of the little implements, every little thing that was done, somebody had a job of taking care of it. And you know what? It probably got dirty after a while. Can you imagine being the guy who had the job of emptying out the soot of the altar of the incense? That's a nasty job. Anybody ever cleaned out your fireplace and all that kind of stuff? That's not a real attractive job. You come out looking, you change colors quick. Well, some of us do. You change colors quick. But it's a dirty job, right? It's going to get soot all over you. There's no getting around it. And if you're not careful and you don't do it right, it's going to be a problem. And I'll give you an example of that. When I was, I was probably only somewhere between 9 and 11 years old, I would imagine. Not very old at all. We were living in La Puente, and my cousin and my brother and I were in the house. My parents had actually gone to clean the church, my grandfather's church down in El Monte. And when they were gone cleaning the church, we were sitting playing a game in our family room, and we smelled smoke. And we looked up, and our kitchen attached to our garage. And through the garage door out the kitchen there, we could see smoke coming in. So being little kids, my cousin was about 3 years older than me. Being just a bunch of little kids. I may have only been 7 or 8. I don't know. We were little bitty guys. And we ran over and we opened the door to see what's going on. We didn't know any better. And just flames were engulfing the garage. And we slammed the door shut. Now, we're all sitting in our underwear because although our clothes were being washed. So we're all just running around in our underwear playing games. We're a bunch of little kids, but 3 little boys running around together, right? That's what little boys do. We didn't know what to do. We started calling people, my grandparents were calling. We didn't know to call the fire department at that point. We didn't know what we were doing. And we're calling everybody. They called 911. Fire department came out. Well, here we are, and it's kind of chilly outside, but we're a bunch of little boys running around in our underwear outside. We didn't know what to do, and our garage going up in flames. You know how it all started? My dad had cleaned the fireplace out. It hadn't been used in a really long time. But he cleaned the fireplace out and put it in a paper bag and had put it in the garage and was going to put it out for the trash. But he did it by hand. Cleaned it out by hand, picked it all up by hand, put it in this paper bag. But in the middle of all that soot was an ember. Was an ember. And that one little ember caught that paper bag on fire and burned our entire garage down. Could have burned our whole house down, right? Fortunately, it was contained to the garage. But it's an incredible thing, and it was a filthy, dirty job. But it's also it's one of those jobs where it has to be done right. And if it's not done right, he would never have thought. If you thought taking it all by hand, you would never have thought there was a problem. Learned a big lesson that day, right? Learned a big lesson. It had to be done right. There's rules to how you do things, right? If not, you might burn the house down, and not in a good way. So this whole thing, everybody had a job, and it had to be done perfectly. It had to be done according to the dictates of what God had laid out, what God had given Moses to lay out. It had to be done perfectly. It had to be done by that person for their job. There were certain parts of the tribe of Levi that were trained from birth to do these jobs. After a while, after it had been established, they were trained from birth. This was what they were going to be. This is what their family did. And this is the way it happened. Yeah, the whole tribe of Levi, this was their job, right? They were to be the administrators of the house of God. The priests and the ones who would be the ministers unto God and unto the people. And part of that job of being the minister unto God and unto the people sometimes is, cleaning the stuff you don't want to clean. Going out and mending a curtain or something, or having to remake it because it's gone wrong. Something's happened. So I just want us to kind of get this picture. All of this, though, supported by the hand of God. All of this put together by God and his hand. All right. So 15 crossbars of gold overlaid the acacia wood, which were to be made. 5 for the north, 5 for the south, 5 for the west. A central crossbar would run halfway up the frames from one end of the tabernacle to the other. These crossbars would be held by golden rings. Excuse me. So, in understanding the way that this is laid out, and we begin to see the view of, we're talking about northwest, east, and south, and all these things. So what we would end up with is a north and a south and a west and an east. And the east end being the point of entry. Okay? Why? The east end would be the point of entry to the tabernacle. And when this tabernacle was set up, you couldn't just go set it someplace. It had to be exactly the right place. It was in the center of the camp of Israel. All the tribes, 4 tribes on each side would camp around. Okay? Or 3 tribes on each side would camp around. I'll get my math right. 3 tribes on each side. Why would this east side be so important, though? Not to the Garden of Eden. What's that? Well, there would be a certain tribe there. The Levites would camp outside here because that's where you would end up using. They would do that. There would be certain tribes, and I didn't pull all the tribes out of where every tribe is, but there's coming off right at the top. So, but what's the real significance of the east side? It's not who's on the outside. The eastern gate. If we talk about, every time we talk about the entrance of God, God coming, God returning, all those things, it's looking to the east. You're praying to Jerusalem, you're looking to the east. If you're coming into Jerusalem, where's Christ going to return to Jerusalem? Through the eastern gate. What did all of the Muslims and the tribes that came in, what did they put in front of the eastern gate? Anybody know what's there now outside of Jerusalem, outside the eastern gate? It's a cemetery. They put a big cemetery out in front. Why? Because no rabbi would walk in through that cemetery. It would not be okay. They think that's going to stop him. That's their effort in stopping Christ from coming in through the eastern gate, right? That is Satan's attempt to stop the God of all creation from walking into his own city. Yeah, right. Yes?
I thought I learned that the Muslims closed it because the Jews believed that the Messiah would come from the east, so they closed it just to prevent that. But you're right, there is
That's exactly what we're talking about. They closed off the eastern gate, but right outside the eastern gate, they put a cemetery to make it unholy ground, so that it's unconsecrated ground now. It's not holy ground. It would make a rabbi unclean to come through there.
So when Christ comes, you're going to be on the east side.
Well, you don't got to be on the east side, but that's where he's going to enter the city. When he comes back at the second coming, not the rapture, but the second coming, when he comes back and he enters victoriously with his people, he will enter through the eastern gate of Jerusalem. It will split. That's right. When he returns, he's going to put one foot on the land on the Mount of Olives. It will split in 4 directions. There will be a great earthquake. And in that split, it will open up whatever needs to open up for him to make his grand entrance into Jerusalem. So man's efforts, Satan's efforts will be null and void, as always. And God's plan will happen. That's the way it'll happen. All right, let's move down. Let me try to get through this 26. Yes?
I made reference of the garden because it does say in verse 24 of chapter
Right. I understand the reference, but that's not the same reference here. Okay. There is a reference. East is always symbolic with God. Okay. But in this particular instance, it's much more because that is the entrance point of God and his people to come in to, not to keep them out, which is what the Eden reference is the keeping people out. This is the reference of God returning and God bringing us in through the eastern gate. It's always had, in Jerusalem, always has had significance. Okay. And this is the precursor. Remember, all of this design is just going to be carried over into the temple, which will be on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Okay. Now, remember when we say mount, we're not talking about Shasta or even, Wrightwood or Bear Mountain or something like that. Everything that's a bump in the ground in Israel is called a mountain. Okay. So the Temple Mount is just an elevated hill area in Jerusalem. Okay. It's not some big old mountain that you go on to. The Mount of Olives is a very small little hill area outside of the city of Jerusalem. It's not a big old mountain. Okay. So just keep that in mind. It's the same thing as if you go to the Philippines. Okay. Philippine Islands. Every time a rock pops up out of the ocean, they call it an island. It's true. It's just true. They got how many islands, Jerry? 10,000 or something like that. They say they got 10,000 islands. They probably got 20 islands and a whole bunch of rocks. It's really the way that we would look at it. Okay. So, but that's I just want to make that little analogy there. Okay. The Lord told Moses to set up the tabernacle according to the plans that he was shown while he was on the mountain. Now, the repetition of this phrase here suggests that Moses has received a vision of exactly what the tabernacle should look like. He had to communicate this vision to the craftsmen who actually did the actual building. Okay? So here's what's happened. Moses has already seen this. God's already given Moses vision, given him direction, all these things. Now he's giving it to Moses to write it down so it can be prepared and made. So the practical application of the vision is happening. That's where we are right now. The practical application of the vision Moses has already had is beginning to happen. Yes, sir. It comes out of verse 30 of chapter 26. Okay, so verse 30 of chapter 26 says, "And you shall raise up the tabernacle according to the patterns which you were shown on the mountain." Okay? So that just gives us reference to the fact that this is not something new to Moses. This is not all new revelation to Moses. Moses has already seen this. God and Moses have already talked. God's let Moses in on the plan. So how cool would it be to be Moses? Can you imagine well, first of all, the one-on-one with God that Moses gets to experience more than one time, multiple times. He gets that one-on-one communication with God. But God sits down and just talks to him. I mean, we know this because God ends up calling him his friend. He's a friend of God. An incredible relationship. I mean, in our men's group here a few years ago, we studied the life of Moses and we talked about it. It was really an awesome deal. But part of that thing is if you're going to have a relationship with God on any kind of level close to anything like that, you got to be willing to be like a Moses, though. Moses was willing to drop his entire world because God said go. Now, he argued with God a little bit, but sometimes friends argue a little bit, right? But in the end, he listened to God, and he went forward, and he went in with God. And that's the thing. When we get into this relationship with God, it's not always that we immediately make the right decisions. We immediately do the right thing. We jump in with both feet. Oh, well, God said it. Bam, let's go. Sometimes there's trepidation. Sometimes there's things that cause us to pause and question. But in the long run, we still listen to God. We listen to God. We don't run. We listen to God. Make sure it's God, but we listen and we do what God says. So that part of Moses' relationship, I love two of the men that God talks about being the closest to him were absolute humans. Moses and David, right? Two of the absolute closest relationships that are discussed in Scripture are Moses and David. Both were murderers. Well, I said two of, not the two closest, but two of the closest relationships. Just crack me up their humanity, right? I mean, Moses was a murderer, right? Moses ran. David was a murderer and an adulterer and a liar, right? And yet, David was a man after God's own heart. Moses was God's friend. You know why? Because he loves humans. He doesn't put up with your sin, but he loves you. And he keeps calling you back. And the reason those guys got that relationship is because when they did mess up, they went back. They went to the right place. They didn't run away from the responsibility of their actions. They ran back to God. That's an important part, yes.
Oh, I was going to, is verse 30 the only reference about Moses being shown the tabernacle on the mountain?
No, I think if we go back to chapter 25, it's just restatements and continuations. Chapter 9 says, verse 9 of chapter 25 says, according to all that I show you, that is the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all of its furnishings, you shall make it. Talking about in the beginning when he shows it to him, not just speaking it to him. And I think there's another reference in, I write this down, 40, I think. What's that?
Chapter 25 talks about the Lord talked to Moses. Verse 12 of chapter 24, the Lord said unto Moses, this is all a continuation, all the way through here, that keeps on going even beyond chapter 26.
Yeah, those refer to when he talked to God. I'm just looking for something more specific to giving them. You make them according to the pattern which was. Okay, verse 40 of chapter 25 was the one I was ruling. Verse 9 and verse 40, I think, are the most prolific to the statement here. But verse 40 of chapter 25 says, and see to it. Now, this is God talking to Moses, right? See to it that you make them according to the pattern which was shown to you on the mountain. Okay, so there is multiple reference to the fact that God has already shown him what's going on, what he's going to do.
This was not written in chapters and verses to begin.
Right. This was not written in chapters and verses in the beginning. It was not written in chronological timing and order. It was written as Moses sat down and wrote these things down because Moses is living this. Moses is having people help him scribe these things as he goes, but he's living this as it happens, and as he has these things scribed down the road and puts these together, it's put together later on into a chapter verse setting by men. I mean, even in the beginning when all this is laid out, it's much more just letter form. You have to get into the Dr. Masters, I don't know if you remember the timing of this. When chapter and verse was actually set, it was later on. What wasn't it close? Even like 1400s or something, or was it earlier on in the 6th and 7th century? When it was actually set to chapter and verse layout. Okay, so before then, it was set in like written letters and open letters that were written out. The biblical theologians and scholars of those times sat down then and laid out a system of chapter and versing it, so it was much easier for study, contextual research, and analogy of the thing, and easier to read. Laid it out so it was a much easier fashion to read as opposed to a long, carried out set of letters or something. Okay, so it's a little different in the way that it was laid out than what we actually read today. Okay, let's see. Okay, a special curtain was to be made for the inside of the tabernacle. It was to be decorated with blue, purple, and scarlet thread and embroidered with cherubim. This curtain was to be hung on golden hooks attached to 4 acacia wood posts set in 4 silver bases. This curtain was the barrier between the holy place and the most holy, or the Holy of Holies. The Ark of the Covenant, with its cover, the place of atonement, or the mercy seat, was to be placed in the room behind this curtain, the most holy place. The room in front of the curtain, the holy place, was to hold the table, the lampstand, and the altar, which would be placed inside on the north and south sides and the west side of the room. All right, so let me read from Guzik again one more time. I found some really cool things about this. The veil separated the tent in two compartments. The first compartment was the holy place, which was the larger room, first entered with the table of showbread and the lampstand and the altar of incense. The second compartment was the most holy place, a smaller room with the Ark of the Covenant. This veil was a barrier, and no priest could go beyond the veil into the most holy place except the high priest. He could only enter once a year, and that was only on the Day of Atonement, okay? Which, by the way, is coming up. We just had Rosh Hashanah, I think it was yesterday, actually. If I'm not mistaken, Rosh Hashanah was yesterday, the New Year, the Jewish New Year, okay? Guzik adds this. He says, in the temple, this veil was torn from top to bottom at the death of Jesus, Matthew 27-51, showing that through his death there was no longer a barrier to the most holy place. Now the most holy place is open to us. It says, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil, that is his flesh. Hebrews 10, 19, and 20. So once again, we are talking about this particular section here. So 4 posts. You see the bottoms of the posts here, because this is cut off in a section, so you can see the building of it. And it was strung from the top, so it was 15 feet high, and it was 15 feet wide. Okay, the construction of this building, you have 30 feet and 15 feet. This room, 15 feet square. Actually, let me rephrase that. 15 feet cubed. Any symbolism there? Let's answer her question while you think of that.
If only the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies, how did they get the Ark of the Covenant in there?
Hocus pocus.
The question is a very good question, by the way, okay? Can you muzzle that, please? It's a very good question. The question is, if only the high priest could go in, how did they ever get the Ark of the Covenant in there? Because one guy wasn't carrying that, okay? The high priest could only go in after the tabernacle was erected, and then the veil was sealed in place. Then the presence of God would return, okay? God allowed for, when it was time to move, he would remove his presence from that room so that the veil could be taken down, the tabernacle deconstructed, broken down, taken to the next place, and then reconstructed. Okay, so it wasn't that remember, it's mobile. It has to be able to be moved. He had to make provision for that to happen. Yes, ma'am.
Now I always heard this, that when the high priest was going to enter in, they had like something around his ankle in order to pull him out.
All of his entire garment, around the base of the garment, were these bells of these pomegranate-looking bells that were around the bottom of the garment that would make noise as he walked. Okay, and there was a rope that was attached to this garment. Now, let me dispel this. Now, we've got a theologian scholar here, and he can argue with me if he thinks differently. And if he does, we'll just not put him on camera and not give him time. No. I do not read of this instance, okay, and this really was not much of a concern. Most of the time we think, well, that way if he went in and he was unholy, they could pull him out, right? Well, it was that way, but these men knew the gravity of what they were doing. And the man who was going to have that job to go in was consecrated for a very long period of time. They would take at least 30 days ahead of when he was going to be going in and begin processes of consecrating himself before God so that he could bring in the sins of the people or the sacrifice for them, but would be very symbolic of Christ himself, of bringing them in to place and sprinkle the blood upon the mercy seat of God, which would be immediately evaporated, as God would take that blood and would immediately take that blood and it would go away. It would not sit on the mercy seat. It would not stay there, because what would happen if blood stayed in a building for very long? Oh, it would go rancid, right? But that's not what would happen, because there was absolutely zero unholiness. Here's the thing. They would not need a rope to pull him out, because the moment he stepped at that veil and inside that veil, if he had sin in his life, he would immediately drop dead at that point. There wouldn't be any getting all the way in and, oh God, now realizing I got sin in my life type of thing. It would be an immediate issue, okay? But yes, that was the makeup of the skirt. But I just don't like the fact that we teach that. So, well, if he got all the way in there and then all of a sudden he had some sin in his life or some evil thought, he would drop dead then, and we'd have to pull him out from 15 feet in. That's not what would have happened, because he never would have made it past the veil. Okay? Yes?
We have an example of that in Eli, the high priest. When there was sin found, his sons were slain at the entrance of going into the courtyard, number one. Number two, he was not inside. He wasn't even on the grounds. He was at his tent, sitting outside on the chair, and he fell over backwards and broke his neck. So most of the instances that we have in recorded history or scripture verify that priests that were unholy were not inside when that took place. So hence, there is no recorded instance where that happened. That was just a
Right.
case you had a hearted sinner.
Right. So the example given of the high priest Eli, when there was sin in his life, his sons, who were the sons of the priest, would be the one. Also, obviously, they were Levites. They would be the ones who would be implementing. The sons of the high priest would be the ones who would do the most of the either outside sacrifices, and we haven't gotten to the exterior courtyard of the tabernacle yet, or the inner workings of the inner side. Before they ever made it inside the holy place, they were killed. They were struck dead, right? As they began to come into the tabernacle area, the courtyard. And then Eli was still sitting in his tent, fell over in his chair, broke his neck. Okay, so there is no recorded incident of somebody walking all the way into the Holy of Holies and all of a sudden getting by the altar of God and then dropping dead and needing to be pulled out. Okay? But this existed and was part of that priestly robe and the makeup that they had, but it wasn't so they could pull him away from the Ark of the Covenant because he got struck dead. It was so that they had an attachment to him and part of it, because he wouldn't make it that far. If there was sin in you, you wouldn't make it that far. These guys who were working in the holy place, they had to get the sin out of their lives. These guys stayed consecrated to God. They stayed consecrated to God. So this is a big, big issue. So this whole building, is absorbed by the presence of God. It might not be the actual seat of God, which is in the Holy of Holies, but it's absorbed by the presence of God. So we have to keep that intact, okay?
Yeah, it's such a revelation to me to know that these days, be once saved, always saved thought, people are not going to be able to make it to heaven, thinking that they can go all the way into the holies of holies and figure, oh, no, you got sin, you want to go. No, it's all about before.
Well, here's the thing, though. So the argument that the statement was made that people who have a once saved, always saved mentality, how could they do that knowing this kind of thing exists? And I'm kind of paraphrasing what was said, but I think this is the crux of it. If I'm wrong, correct me. Knowing that this kind of things exist, that you can't come into the presence of God with sin in your life. Here's the argument that the once saved, always saved would give you: that prayer that I prayed to ask Jesus to come into my heart covered me by the grace of God, and that grace covers all sin and forgives all sin. So no matter what I end up doing, I'm covered by the grace of God. So he forgives me already. So it's like pre-forgiveness. But they forget the third chapter. I think it's verse 26 or verse 28, where it says that I was forgiven for all my past sin. It doesn't say past, present, and future. It says I was forgiven for all my past sin. God does not pre-forgive sin. It's not the way that grace is designed. It's not, and once again, I use this all the time. It's not designed to be your get out of hell free card. It's designed to be your power to overcome sin to make it to heaven. Right? That's what God designed grace for. So that understanding and that knowledge is really important stuff. We have to get to that place. So that's the argument. I agree with your concept, okay, fully. I think that we all need to go that route and make sure the sin's out of our life so we still have access to the Holy of Holies or the mercy seat of God. But that's the argument that they would give you from a once saved, always saved standpoint, okay? The veil of Matthew 27:51 also symbolizes the broken body of Jesus through which we have access to the most holy place. So this veil that we look at here, this beautiful adorned veil, which looks very much like the overhang that's inside, that you look up and see all the the cherubim and the beauty of the blue and scarlet and all these things, the beautiful ordained stuff. This would have those cherubim and everything on it as well. It would just be this gorgeous, incredibly ornate, shimmering off of the gold. I mean, just all this stuff beyond explanation. To have been privileged to stand in the holy place or the Holy of Holies would be beyond imagination. Just beyond imagination. You can't imagine, because if you put this, you could put this all together and you can look at it and we can say, yeah, that's awesome. It's crazy, right? But to actually walk in after it had been put together and constructed and then consecrated to God, and the presence of God settles in the building, and that Shekinah glory just settles in the building, right? Now all of a sudden, the light from the inside out, the golden candlestick is lit to give the light to the room from the outside. God himself is in the light back here. Remember, there's no candles back here. So when the priest walks behind that veil, where did the light come from? It came from the Shekinah glory of God. Because God is light, right? We talk. I say this a lot in sermons and such. The light of God dissipates all darkness. So in that room, there was no darkness. There was not even shadow. Not even shadow exists in the light of God, because the light of God comes from above, below, side to side, inside and out, all around. There is no darkness of any kind that can exist in the presence of God. So when that presence was there, all of the light was there. It all existed. So there was this beauty, this shimmering beauty that existed in those rooms that's beyond imagination, beyond compare. We can't even begin to fathom what that must have been like. Just crazy.
Who actually, just so many, how many priests could go inside this?
We'll get more to that as we go. We'll answer those questions a lot more about the actual ordinances and dealing with that as we go. So I don't want to get too far ahead of all that. Okay. So I gotta fix this so it doesn't keep going off on me. Yes, sir.
There was a song we used to sing that was totally untheological. Standing somewhere in the shadows, you'll find Jesus. Well, you can't find him in shadows, because there is no shadow involving him, who is the total essence and the embodiment of light.
Well, I think your statement's absolutely correct. There is no shadow, and the song "Somewhere in the Shadows You'll Find Jesus." I think that's where we end up finding him, is where we come out of the shadows to find him, because in the shadows of our life is when we find our need for him, and then we go find him, and he removes the shadow. So it blows away. His light just it draws us and it destroys us like a moth to a flame. It destroys the shadow. All right. The table of showbread was on the north side, okay? So once again, north. If this is east, that would be north. This is south, and that's west, okay? So the table of showbread was on the north side of the tabernacle, and the lampstand was toward the south, and the furniture in the holy place spoke of three great obligations of walking with God: prayer, which is the altar of incense, which we haven't gotten to yet; fellowship, which was the table of showbread; and to receive illumination from God, which was the lampstand. Another curtain was to be made for the tabernacle entrance. This curtain was also to be decorated with blue, purple, and scarlet thread and embroidered with beautiful designs, and it was to be hung from golden hooks attached to 5 golden overlaid acacia wood posts set into 5 bronze bases out front. So instead of the silver bases that would be back here going into the Holy of Holies, instead of those things, the silver bases would hold, these were all made out of bronze in the front. Now, these are only 5. Back in the back, there were to be 6. These 5 were strong. They were huge. They were massive. And they held the front entrance, and the front entrance was also something of beauty, although it was not quite as ornate as the overlaying interior curtain or the veil that separated, okay? It was still to be made of the same colors, beautiful threads and all those things, but not quite as ornate with the cherubim and all those kinds of things, okay? So still giving a level of beauty to the entrance, but still on the outside it looked kind of dull from everybody else looking around at it. But when you got close to it, you started to realize where you were headed, right? That's what happens with God. It might look dull sometimes, but once you get close to it, you know, I can imagine getting close to the entrance of the tabernacle and start to feel the presence, start to see the beauty, and start to feel the presence, right? So that's the construction. That's chapter 26, the construction of the tabernacle. Anybody any questions?
Yeah, it says, it wandered in the wilderness, they all died off, right? All the people, all of that generation died off. So their inheritance went on, just kept teaching their kids to go do that.
So the question was, in the wilderness, the generation of the wilderness had to die off before they could get to the promised land, and the wilderness was the place where they traveled. So how did that, they would hand that down to their kids. Okay, keep in mind, not everybody died. There was Aaron was still there, the priest, a lot of the priesthood was still there because they believed. Joshua and his family, Caleb, his family, all of them, they were still there. But the generation of doubt had to die. Okay, so there was a huge amount, a huge percentage of them that passed and had to die off because it was a generation of doubt. There was still still several of that generation that lived. We would assume that a lot of that would come from the house of Levi or the priesthood. But the next step that you said is absolutely true. They would hand this down to their children. That's how the priesthood continued. The priesthood was not other tribes being called into the ministry. There was a tribe of ministry. There was the Levites. So when a Levite male was born, he was given a job, and he was trained for that job all his life. He knew what he was going to do when he grew up. And it was an honor and privilege to do so. Okay? Keep that in mind. You know, if my dad would have told me when I was a kid I was going to be a preacher, I would have hated my dad. I really would have. I was like, hey, I don't want nothing to do with all that mess. I'm going to go off. I want to go make money. I want to have a good time in life. All right? So I would not have wanted that. But these families, they considered this to be a privilege. Okay? It was an honor to serve. But yes, it was handed down. And same as all of the other tribes, by the way. All of the tribes were usually on a big scale. You know, obviously there were a lot of little things that got done inside each tribe. But they all had professions, basically, right? Skills, trades. So each of the tribes would have trades. Now, because the tribe of Levite were not tradesmen, they were the ministers and the administrators of the things of God, all of the other tribes supported the tribe of Levi. They're in the tithing systems and all that stuff get involved, and God provides for the household of ministry through all of that. Okay. Sacrifices, you know, when the sacrifices would come in, they would get a lot of that for food as well. Yeah. Some of that was given to them for food. So, and the table of showbread, when they take the bread off the table of showbread, certain of those priests, they would eat that. Now you say, well, I've been sitting out for a week. Why would I want that? Well, because it didn't go bad, because it was in the presence of God. I'm not even going to say that on camera. Okay. So what's cool about that, though, I do like that, is because you think about the fact that they take that off the table and eat it. It's week-old bread that had been sitting out. Now, it's one thing to have week-old bread that's been in a package and sealed up, right, and all that stuff, you know, but week-old bread that's been sitting out is pretty rock hard and nasty, right? The heat that they were in, you know, it's even though they were protected from the elements, it still had to be hot inside of that place. Now, we say that, but there's a lot of commentary that speaks to the fact that that place was perfect temperature, perfect atmosphere because of the presence of God. Okay? So, but here's what I do know. Didn't matter how long that bread would have been in there. The presence of God does one thing to our souls and to everything around it. It preserves. It preserves. So they could take it out and it would be as fresh as the day that it was made. So, thing of beauty. Any other questions?
Silly question.
No.
They say that the Levites still exist today under some sort of names like Levi or Cohen or something. Have you heard of that?
Well, sure, the Levites still exist today. Absolutely. The tribe of Levi still exists today. The Levites have never gone away. Just like the Reubenites and the Benjamites and the Danites and all the other guys, all the otherites are still out there. They are diluted. The tribes have been diluted and pushed aside, but there still is remnant of pure lines. Okay, that is also evidence in the book of Revelation, because when the 12,000 of each tribe are taken, they will be 12,000 of pure line and lineage of each of the 12 tribes. So there's at least 12,000 pure-blooded Levites out there somewhere. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So even though it's pretty diluted and there's a lot of things out there in the world, that all of those tribes still exist. God's promise has not been diluted. It has not been done away with by the atrocities of man. It has not been done away with by the attempts at extermination of God's people, all those stuff. He still has his remnant. Still has his remnant. Okay, anyone else? All right. God bless you this morning. Thank you for coming, and we will jump into the 27th chapter next week and get going down that. Amen. Let's pray. Father, once again, we are so thankful for your word, and we are so thankful for your design for salvation since eternity past, God, and how you've used man to build things for you that you've designed to show us your love and to bring us into true worship before you. And I'm so thankful that your Son completed and fulfilled all things for us. Today we pray that you just keep us in that knowledge and that comfort and that peace. You bring us back the next appointed time safely. In your name we pray. Amen.